A single gunshot echoes through Dealey Plaza, and in that instant, American royalty dies. November 22, 1963. The most powerful political dynasty in United States history crumbles in 6 seconds of grainy film footage. The president's blood splatters across his wife's pink suit, while millions will later watch the moment democracy's illusions shatter. But the real story doesn't begin in Dallas. It begins 114 years earlier, in the stinking hold of a coffin ship crossing the Atlantic, carrying a 26-year-old Cooper with nothing but rage at the poverty that nearly killed him. Boston Harbor, 1849. Patrick Kennedy stumbles off the boat into a city that considers his kind barely human. Signs in shop windows announce, "No Irish need apply," with the casual cruelty of natural law. The Protestant elite who trace their lineage to the Mayflower control every bank, every business, every lever of power. Irish Catholics are flooding into Boston by the thousands, fleeing a famine that has transformed their homeland into a mass grave. They're drunken, violent, fundamentally incapable of civilization. At least that's what the newspapers say. Patrick Kennedy sees something different. He sees 10,000 desperate men who need 3 things: community, representation, and a place to drink away the memories of what they left behind. Within 5 years, Patrick owns a saloon in East Boston, generating $1.800 in annual revenue, more than most professionals earn. But the money isn't the point. Every pint sold is a vote cultivated. Every conversation overheard is intelligence gathered. Every favor granted is a debt to be collected. When the Know-Nothing Party sweeps Massachusetts in 1854 on a platform of anti-immigrant hatred, Patrick's saloon becomes the nerve center of Irish resistance. He coordinates voter registration drives. He recruits candidates. He builds a network that will outlive him by a century. Patrick Kennedy dies at 35 in 1858, probably from cholera, definitely from working himself to death. He leaves behind a widow, 4 children, and a radical idea. In America, power doesn't belong to those born with it. It belongs to those ruthless enough to take it. His son, Patrick Joseph Kennedy, PJ, elevates crude ambition into something approaching art. By 1886, he controlled 5 saloons across East Boston. By 1888, he sits in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. By 1890, his East Boston Savings Bank holds $850,000 in deposits, the accumulated savings of Irish immigrants who trust P.J. Kennedy because he's one of them. Except he's not one of them anymore. He wears tailored suits. He speaks proper English. He keeps company with judges and businessmen who would have spat on his father. P.J. understands what his father never lived long enough to learn. Ethnic politics has a ceiling. You can become king of the Irish, but that makes you a provincial ruler in a global empire. Real power requires transcending tribal loyalties. So P.J. marries Mary Augusta Hickey, a mayor's daughter, with social connections, and begins planning his son's escape velocity from immigrant politics. Joseph Patrick Kennedy Sr. was born in 1888 with advantages his grandfather couldn't have imagined: wealth, education, and a father who understood how American power actually worked. But Joe Kennedy also inherits something more dangerous: expectations. He's not just supposed to succeed. He's supposed to obliterate every limitation that has constrained his family. Harvard University, 1908. Joe Kennedy walks onto a campus where his Irish Catholic background marks him as fundamentally inferior. His Protestant classmates tolerate his presence without welcoming it. They let him know, in 1,000 subtle ways, that he doesn't belong. Each slight becomes fuel. Each condescending comment gets filed away for future reference. Joe Kennedy isn't trying to join their world. He's studying it, learning its weaknesses, preparing to replace it. Harvard teaches Joe Kennedy the most valuable lesson of his life: the American elite is a fraud. Behind the old money and older names, he discovers men who want the same things his father's saloon customers wanted. They're just better at lying about it. They tell themselves they serve noble principles when they're really serving their own bank accounts. If hypocrisy is the price of admission to real power, Joe Kennedy will pay it more skillfully than anyone else. Wall Street, 1919. While other young men return from the Great War to resume conventional careers, Joe Kennedy is already dissecting American finance like a cadaver. The stock market isn't a rational system for allocating capital. It's a psychological battlefield where information and nerve determine victory. Between 1922 and 1929, Kennedy's net worth explodes from $2 million to over $15 million. He builds his fortune using techniques that won't be illegal for another 15 years. Stock pools, insider trading, market manipulation. The line between legal and illegal is just a matter of timing, and Joe Kennedy has perfect timing. He makes his money and gets out before the rules change, leaving his competitors to face consequences for practices he helped pioneer. But Kennedy's greatest insight isn't financial, it's cultural. Wealth without respectability is just elaborate poverty. The robber barons accumulated vast fortunes but remained outcasts. Andrew Carnegie's $475 million couldn't buy acceptance into New York's most exclusive clubs. John D. Rockefeller's billions couldn't stop cartoonists from drawing him as an octopus strangling democracy. Joe Kennedy studies their mistakes and determines to avoid their fate. Hollywood, 1926. While Wall Street financiers sneer at movies as beneath their dignity, Kennedy recognizes cinema as the most powerful force in American culture. Movies don't just entertain, they shape how Americans see themselves. Control the stories, and you control the storytellers. Control the storytellers, and you control the culture. Kennedy doesn't just invest in Hollywood, he seduces it. The affair with Gloria Swanson isn't merely a personal indiscretion, it's a strategic alliance. Through Swanson and other Hollywood connections, Kennedy learns to craft public images, manage media narratives, and make people fall in love with carefully constructed fantasies. His investment in RKO Pictures generates over $5 million in profits between 1928 and 1931, but the real value lies in what he learns. These skills will prove essential when he begins grooming his sons for careers that depend more on charisma than competence. Then there's Prohibition. Did Joe Kennedy make millions importing illegal liquor? The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Sudden wealth that can't be fully explained by documented business activities. Connections to known bootleggers like Frank Costello and Meyer Lansky. A network spanning Boston to London to the Caribbean. When Prohibition ended in 1933, Kennedy's Somerset Importers was suspiciously well positioned to import Scotch whiskey, suggesting preparation that predated legal opportunity. Whether Kennedy was a bootlegger or not, he certainly thinks like one. American morality is performance. The society that condemns illegal liquor drinks it enthusiastically. Politicians who vote for Prohibition take money from liquor interests. Newspapers that editorialize against organized crime depend on crime stories for circulation. Kennedy recognizes that American righteousness is theater, and like any theater, it can be directed, scripted, and produced. October 29, 1929. The stock market crashes. The Dow Jones Industrial Average will eventually fall 89% from its peak. Fortunes evaporate overnight. Men leap from office windows rather than face their ruined investors. Joe Kennedy not only preserves his wealth, but expands it, having shorted the market based on insider information that the boom was unsustainable. By 1929, his net worth had approached $20 million, equivalent to roughly $300 million today. But money isn't enough to satisfy the ambition driving 3 generations of Kennedy men. Joe Kennedy wants something that wealth can't buy. He wants his family remembered as American royalty. Franklin Roosevelt's election in 1932 provided Kennedy with his opening. His $25,000 contribution to FDR's campaign and his work organizing Wall Street support for the Democratic ticket earned him appointment as the first chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The irony escapes no one. Who better to catch thieves than a former thief? Who better to understand market manipulation than someone who perfected it? Kennedy's tenure at the SEC is brief but transformative. The Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, implemented under his leadership, create the regulatory framework that still governs American capital markets today. It's masterful political theater. The poacher turned gamekeeper, the sinner turned saint, the outsider transformed into the ultimate insider. Kennedy rehabilitates his reputation while writing rules that protect his fortune. But personal success has never been Kennedy's real objective. His ambition is dynastic. Every business deal, every political alliance, every social connection gets evaluated through one lens. How does this advance the Kennedy family's long-term interests? He doesn't just want success, he wants to create a political dynasty that will dominate American politics for generations. He has identified the perfect vehicles: His 4 sons, each groomed from birth to fulfill the destiny 3 generations of Kennedy men have been building toward. Joseph Kennedy Jr. is the chosen one. Handsome, charismatic, politically astute, Joe Jr. combines his father's ambition with his mother's social graces. He represents everything the Kennedy family has worked toward. An Irish-American who can appeal across ethnic and class lines, a Catholic who can win Protestant support, a politician who can transform the Kennedy name from immigrant ambition into American leadership. By 1940, at 25, Joe Jr. is already mentioned as a future presidential candidate. His path to the White House seems as inevitable as his father's rise to wealth. World War II intervenes with cruel randomness. Joe Jr. volunteers for Operation Aphrodite, a top-secret program involving flying explosive-laden aircraft into German targets. On August 12, 1944, his plane exploded in mid-air over the English Channel. The Kennedy dynasty doesn't die with Joe Jr., but it changes in ways that will prove both more spectacular and more tragic than anyone imagines. The burden falls to the second son. John Fitzgerald Kennedy is a reluctant politician who would have preferred journalism or academia. But Joe Kennedy Sr. doesn't accept reluctance. The family has invested too much, sacrificed too much, come too far to let individual preferences derail the grand design. Jack Kennedy will run for office, and he will win, because failure isn't an option the Kennedy family recognizes. The 1946 congressional race in Massachusetts becomes Joe Kennedy's laboratory. Money flows like water, not just Kennedy money, but money from every favor Joe has accumulated over 3 decades. The campaign spends an estimated $300,000, 10 times more than any previous race in the district. But the money doesn't just buy advertisements. It purchases loyalty, manufactures enthusiasm, and creates the illusion of grassroots support for what is actually a corporate takeover of the democratic process. Jack Kennedy's victory in 1946 vindicates everything the Kennedy family believes about America. In a country that once posted "No Irish Need Apply" signs, an Irish Catholic has just been elected to Congress not despite his background, but because of how skillfully that background has been packaged and sold. The immigrant's grandson has become the embodiment of the American dream, and the American dream has become a Kennedy family product. By 1952, Jack Kennedy won a Senate seat, defeating incumbent Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. by 70,000 votes. The Lodge family has been Massachusetts royalty since before the Revolution. Their defeat by an Irish upstart represents more than a political upset. It represents the complete inversion of Boston's social hierarchy. The Lodges built their power over 2 centuries. The Kennedys have done it in 3 generations. Joe Kennedy watches from the shadows as his son becomes a national figure. Every speech is crafted. Every photograph is staged. Every interview is rehearsed. The man Americans see on their television screens is a carefully constructed product, the culmination of a century-long project to transform an Irish immigrant family into American aristocracy. Jack Kennedy's chronic health problems, Addison's disease requiring daily cortisone injections, back pain requiring regular procaine shots, are hidden behind a facade of youthful vigor. His compulsive affairs are concealed by a compliant press corps that knows but doesn't report. The packaging works. By 1956, Jack Kennedy is being mentioned as a vice presidential candidate. By 1958, he's preparing to run for president. And Joe Kennedy is orchestrating every move, calling in every favor, spending every dollar necessary to put his son in the White House. The 1960 presidential campaign will cost the Kennedy family an estimated $13 million, equivalent to over $100 million today. But Joe Kennedy doesn't care about the cost. He's been paying for this moment since 1849, when his grandfather stepped off a coffin ship into Boston Harbor with nothing but the clothes on his back and a refusal to accept the fate that poverty assigned him. 4 generations, 111 years. The Kennedy dynasty is about to reach its apex. The steps of the Capitol have never felt the weight of so much expectation. January 20, 1961. John Fitzgerald Kennedy places his hand on a family Bible and becomes the youngest elected president in American history. He looks like a movie star. He speaks like a poet. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. 80 million Americans watch on television as the immigrant's great-grandson transforms into something America has never seen, a president born for the camera age. The inauguration is a cultural earthquake disguised as a ceremony. Dwight Eisenhower, the grandfatherly war hero who presided over 8 years of suburban tranquility, hands power to a man young enough to be his son. Jackie Kennedy, radiant in pink Chanel, doesn't just look like a first lady. She looks like American royalty. And Jack Kennedy's victory margin tells the real story. 827 votes out of nearly 69 million cast. The presidency has been won by the narrowest of margins, purchased by the largest of fortunes. Behind the pageantry, a more complex drama unfolds. The Kennedy administration isn't just a presidency, it's a family business operation. Joe Kennedy Sr. holds no official title, but his influence permeates every decision. Bobby Kennedy becomes Attorney General at 35, despite never having prosecuted a case. Ted Kennedy is being groomed for a Senate seat he's too young to legally hold. The Irish Catholic family that America once considered unfit for citizenship hasn't just captured the White House, they've turned it into a dynasty headquarters. The early months reveal both promise and peril. Jack Kennedy's intelligence is undeniable, so is his inexperience. The Bay of Pigs invasion, planned under Eisenhower but executed under Kennedy, became a humiliating disaster. April 17, 1961, 400 CIA-trained Cuban exiles land expecting American air support that never arrives. Within 72 hours, 114 are dead, and 189 are captured. The young president, who promised to, quote, pay any price, bear any burden, discovers some prices exceed even Kennedy's wealth. But failure becomes the foundation for success. The Bay of Pigs teaches Jack Kennedy that charm and good intentions aren't enough. He needs the ruthless calculation his father has been teaching him since childhood. 13 months later, those lessons will save the world. October 1962. Soviet missiles in Cuba bring civilization to the edge of nuclear annihilation. For 13 days from October 14th to October 28th, human survival depends on a man who 18 months earlier had never made a decision more consequential than which Senate committee to join. The pressure would crush most people. Instead, it reveals steel beneath the polish, the same steel that has driven 3 generations of Kennedy men to achieve the impossible. Soviet ships carrying missiles to Cuba turned back on October 24th. Kennedy has stared down the Soviet Union without starting World War III. His approval rating hits 83%, the highest of his presidency. The boy king has become a genuine statesman, but the real architect of Kennedy's power isn't Jack. It's Bobby. Robert Francis Kennedy, the third son who was never supposed to matter, emerges as the most ruthless political operative of his generation. As Attorney General, Bobby doesn't enforce the law, he weaponizes it. The Justice Department pursues organized crime figures like Carlos Marcello and Sam Giancana. Bobby's prosecution of Teamsters leader Jimmy Hoffa resulted in a 13-year prison sentence in 1964. His investigation of organized crime produced 288 indictments and 177 convictions between 1961 and 1963. The Kennedy brothers create something unprecedented, a presidency that operates like a family business, where loyalty matters more than competence, where blood ties trump institutional norms. Jack provides charisma and vision. Bobby provides muscle and execution. Together they form a single political organism, each incomplete without the other. When Jack needs someone eliminated from the administration, Bobby handles it. When Bobby needs political cover for controversial prosecutions, Jack provides it. Meanwhile, Jackie Kennedy revolutionizes the role of First Lady. She doesn't just host state dinners. She transforms the White House into a showcase of American sophistication. Her televised tour on February 14, 1962, draws 80 million viewers. Her restoration cost $2 million in private donations, but generates priceless cultural impact. Jackie isn't just the president's wife. She's America's queen, proving Americans like having royalty more than they ever admitted. Beneath the glamour, darker currents flow. Jack Kennedy's health problems remain hidden from the public. His Addison's disease requires daily cortisone injections. His chronic back pain necessitates regular shots of Procaine and Novocaine. His various ailments are treated with steroids, antibiotics, antihistamines, and stimulants that create pharmaceutical dependency. His doctors struggle to manage. His affairs, Marilyn Monroe, Judith Campbell Exner, dozens of others, create security risks the Secret Service can barely control. The Kennedy presidency becomes a high-wire act without a net. Every success creates new dangers. Every triumph raises the stakes for the next performance. The same charisma that makes Kennedy beloved makes him a target for ambitious politicians, foreign dictators, and domestic extremists. The same family loyalty that gives the Kennedys their strength creates blind spots enemies can exploit. Civil rights becomes the defining issue. Jack Kennedy entered office with little passion for racial justice, viewing it primarily as a political problem to be managed. His narrow victory margin and dependence on Southern Democrats make bold action dangerous. But Bobby Kennedy gradually becomes convinced that racial segregation represents the same systematic injustice he's fighting elsewhere. September 1962. James Meredith attempts to enroll as the first black student at the University of Mississippi. The Kennedy administration faces a choice: enforce federal law and risk violent confrontation, or compromise with segregationists and betray their principles. They choose confrontation. 400 federal marshals, eventually 20,000 federal troops, ensured Meredith's enrollment. The victory costs 2 deaths, 300 injuries, and $4 million. But it establishes the Kennedys as genuinely committed to racial progress. Yet the Kennedys operate according to ruthless pragmatism. They cultivate relationships with both Martin Luther King Jr. and segregationist Democrats like James Eastland and Richard Russell. When FBI wiretaps reveal King's extramarital affairs, Bobby authorizes continued surveillance while publicly supporting King's work. Maximum flexibility, minimum commitment. Kennedy's foreign policy reveals the same pattern of brilliance and recklessness. The Alliance for Progress promises $20 billion over 10 years to transform Latin America. The Peace Corps sent 7,300 young Americans to 44 countries by 1963 as ambassadors of democratic values. The space program commits to landing on the moon before the decade's end, requiring $25 billion over 8 years. Each initiative reflects genuine idealism combined with shrewd calculation, but together they create commitments that may be impossible to fulfill. Vietnam represents the most fateful decision. The commitment of 16,000 military advisors to South Vietnam by November 1963 seems like a reasonable compromise between abandoning an ally and fighting a major war. But it establishes precedents and creates obligations that will drag America into its longest, most divisive conflict. The $500 million in annual aid represents just the down payment on a war that will cost $120 billion and 58,000 American lives. By 1963, Kennedy has achieved popularity bordering on worship. Jack and Jackie aren't just political leaders, they're cultural icons. Gallup consistently shows approval above 60%. The White House has become Camelot, a magical kingdom where intelligence, beauty, and power combine to create something approaching perfection. But cracks appear in the facade. Jack Kennedy's health continues to deteriorate, requiring ever more dangerous medication combinations. His affairs become more reckless. Judith Campbell Exner is simultaneously involved with Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana. The family's financial dealings attract unwanted attention. The Merchandise Mart in Chicago, purchased by Joe Kennedy for $13 million in 1945, generates millions in annual rental income, funding political activities. More ominously, Kennedy's successes have created powerful enemies, beginning to coordinate their opposition. Southern segregationists view the Kennedys as traitors to white supremacy. Organized crime sees Bobby's Justice Department as an existential threat. Anti-Castro Cubans blame the Kennedys for the Bay of Pigs failure and the peaceful resolution of the Missile Crisis. Conservative politicians resent Kennedy's dominance of American politics. Each group has reasons for wanting the Kennedys destroyed, and by 1963, those reasons are converging. The trip to Texas in November 1963 is designed to heal political wounds and prepare for 1964. Texas Democrats are feuding. Liberal Senator Ralph Yarborough refuses to appear with conservative Governor John Connally, threatening Kennedy's chances in a state he needs. The visit to Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio is supposed to demonstrate continued popularity and unite the fractious state party. Instead, it becomes the stage for the most shocking assassination in American history. November 22, 1963. Dealey Plaza, 12:30 p.m. The shots that killed John F. Kennedy don't just end a presidency. They shatter the illusion that America is civilized, that political differences are resolved democratically. The man who embodied American optimism dies in the most public, brutal way imaginable. His blood and brains splatter across the pink suit that had made his wife a fashion icon hours earlier. The Zapruder film, 26.6 seconds of 8mm footage, captures the moment American innocence dies with its president. Within hours, Bobby Kennedy begins his transformation from political operative to something approaching prophet. The brother who had been the family enforcer becomes its conscience, channeling grief into a passionate commitment to causes Jack had reluctantly embraced. The death of one Kennedy brother creates conditions for the apotheosis of another. The 5 years between Jack's assassination and Bobby's presidential campaign represent the Kennedy family's most complex period. Bobby serves as Attorney General under Lyndon Johnson until September 1964, but their relationship is poisoned by mutual suspicion and barely concealed contempt. Johnson sees Bobby as a threat, a living reminder he occupies the White House only because of an assassin's bullet. Bobby sees Johnson as a usurper who has stolen what belongs to the Kennedy family, a crude politician lacking the vision and sophistication the presidency requires. Bobby's evolution from operative to crusader accelerates after he leaves the Justice Department and wins election to the Senate from New York in 1964. The man who once wiretapped Martin Luther King Jr. became one of the most passionate advocates for civil rights. The Attorney General, reluctant to challenge organized crime, becomes a champion of the poor and dispossessed. The Kennedy brother, content to operate in Jack's shadow, emerges as a political figure with his own vision and constituency. His 1966 trip to South Africa, where he delivered a speech at the University of Cape Town condemning apartheid, establishes him as a global symbol of human rights. Bobby Kennedy becomes the voice of Americans who believe in progress but recognize that achieving it requires confronting uncomfortable truths. His 1968 book, To Seek a Newer World, articulates a vision more idealistic and realistic than anything Jack proposed. By 1968, he has positioned himself as the alternative to both Johnson's failed presidency and Nixon's conservative restoration. His campaign combines Kennedy's political sophistication with moral passion that Jack never possessed. He appeals to black voters in urban ghettos and white working-class voters who feel abandoned by the Democratic Party's embrace of civil rights. His victory in the Indiana primary on May 7, 1968, proves that a Kennedy can still win conservative territory. His triumph in Nebraska on May 14 demonstrates appeal to rural voters. For a brief moment, it seems possible Bobby Kennedy might succeed where Jack failed, not just in winning power, but in using it to create genuine justice. The California primary on June 4, 1968, represents the culmination of Bobby's political resurrection. His victory over Eugene McCarthy by 46% to 42% gives him momentum to challenge Hubert Humphrey for the Democratic nomination. The speech he delivers to supporters at the Ambassador Hotel captures both his skill and his vision. We can work together in the last analysis, and what has been going on within the United States over the period of the last 3 years. The divisions, the violence, the disenchantment with our society. We can start to work together. The shots that kill Bobby Kennedy in the Ambassador Hotel kitchen at 12:15 a.m. on June 5th don't just end another promising career. They destroy the last hope that the Kennedy vision might be realized through democratic means. Sirhan's .22 caliber revolver fires 8 shots. 3 strike Kennedy in the head and neck. He dies 26 hours later at Good Samaritan Hospital, his death witnessed by millions who had stayed awake to watch election returns. The funeral becomes a national ritual transcending partisan politics. The train carrying his body from New York to Washington on June 8th is lined with 2 million Americans of every race, class, and political affiliation, united in grief for a man who represented their hopes for a better country. But the mourning carries something darker than sadness, recognition that with Bobby's death, something essential has been lost from American politics, something that may never be recovered. The Kennedy dynasty survives, but the Kennedy dream dies in that hotel kitchen, leaving only a memory of what might have been. The black water of Pocha Pond reflects no stars on the night of July 18, 1969. Senator Edward Kennedy's Oldsmobile plunges off the Dyke Bridge on Chappaquiddick Island, carrying with it the life of Mary Jo Kopechne and the last remnants of Camelot itself. By the time Ted Kennedy emerges from those dark waters, gasping and disoriented, the Kennedy dynasty as America knew it is already drowning. The hours that follow reveal everything about Kennedy's crisis management. Ted doesn't call the police. He doesn't call an ambulance. He calls his father's old fixers, Paul Markham and Joe Gargan, the same men who spent decades protecting Kennedy interests from inconvenient truths. The instinct is pure Kennedy. When in trouble, protect the family first, deal with consequences later. But by 1969, techniques that once made the family invincible had become liabilities in a media environment that no longer granted automatic deference to American royalty. Mary Jo Kopechne's body wasn't discovered until 8:45 a.m. the next morning, nearly 10 hours after the accident. Ted Kennedy doesn't report the incident to the police until 9:45 a.m. after the car has already been found. His story, that he dove repeatedly to save Kopechne, then walked back to his hotel in shock, contradicts witness accounts and basic physics. The media that once collaborated in creating the Kennedy myth now participates eagerly in its destruction. The New York Times ran 67 stories about Chappaquiddick in the following month. Time magazine's cover, The Kennedy Debacle. Ted Kennedy's televised address on July 25th, a week after the accident, becomes a masterclass in damage control and a monument to Kennedy's self-deception. He admits inexcusable behavior while arguing he was the victim of a scrambled thought process caused by shock. He accepts responsibility while deflecting blame. He expresses remorse while maintaining innocence of criminal wrongdoing. 30 million viewers watch. Only 32% believe his account. The speech works in the narrow sense. Ted keeps his Senate seat, avoids criminal prosecution. Massachusetts voters re-elect him in 1970 with 62% of the vote. But the victory costs everything. The Kennedy family's claim to moral authority dies in the waters of Poucha Pond. The dynasty survives, but transformed into something its founders would barely recognize. Yet even as Ted's presidential ambitions drown, the Kennedy name retains power that transcends individual failure. The third generation, Jack's daughter Caroline, Bobby's sons Joe II, Robert Jr., Michael and David, Ted's children Kara, Edward Jr., and Patrick, grow up in the shadow of martyred uncles and a disgraced father. They're not just children. They're living symbols of American possibility and American tragedy, raised to believe their family name obligates them to public service, while simultaneously making that service almost impossible to perform effectively. The pattern of Kennedy tragedy in the 1970s and 1980s defies rational explanation, but becomes impossible to ignore. David Kennedy, Bobby's fourth son, struggles with drug addiction from his teenage years. His problems begin after witnessing his father's assassination on television at age 12. Despite multiple rehabilitation attempts, including stays at facilities costing $50,000 per month, David dies of a cocaine and Demerol overdose in a Palm Beach hotel room on April 25, 1984. He is 28 years old, the same age his father was when he became Attorney General. Michael Kennedy, another of Bobby's sons, dies in a skiing accident in Aspen on December 31, 1997, months after a scandal involving an affair with his children's teenage babysitter nearly destroys his marriage and career. The accident occurs while playing football on skis with other family members, a reckless game epitomizing Kennedy athleticism and poor judgment. He strikes a tree at high speed and dies instantly. John F. Kennedy Jr., the son who captured America's heart as a 3-year-old saluting his father's coffin, dies in a plane crash off Martha's Vineyard on July 16, 1999. He takes with him his wife Carolyn and sister-in-law Lauren Bissett. The crash occurs when John Jr., piloting his Piper Saratoga II, becomes disoriented in hazy conditions and loses control. He had only 310 hours of flying experience and wasn't qualified for instrument flight, but he chose to fly anyway, driven by the same Kennedy confidence that propelled his family to greatness and destruction in equal measure. The Coast Guard recovery operation costs $9 million and involves 15 ships, 6 aircraft, and 400 personnel. Between 1944 and 1999, the Kennedy family suffers 13 deaths by accident, assassination, suicide, or overdose, a mortality rate exceeding statistical probability by orders of magnitude. Each tragedy reinforces the perception that the family is cursed, that their early success came at a price subsequent generations are still paying. But the most complex figure in the Kennedy family's modern incarnation is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Bobby's third son, who has spent his adult life trying to honor his father's legacy while forging his own path. Unlike cousins who sought traditional political careers, RFK Jr. chose environmental crusade. For 3 decades, he's been one of America's most effective environmental lawyers, winning cases against powerful corporations and helping clean rivers and watersheds poisoned by industrial waste. His work with the Hudson Riverkeeper beginning in 1984 restored a river system declared biologically dead in the 1960s. His lawsuits against ExxonMobil resulted in a $12 million settlement for groundwater contamination. His prosecution of Smithfield Foods led to a $12.6 million fine for water pollution violations. In a family known for political ambition, RFK Jr. chose a different kind of power, the power to heal the natural world that human greed has damaged. Yet RFK Jr.'s environmental work represents only one facet of a complex and contradictory persona. His struggles with heroin addiction in the 1980s, including a 1983 arrest for possession resulting in community service, his messy divorce from Mary Richardson Kennedy, who committed suicide in 2012, and his tendency to embrace conspiracy theories have made him controversial even among those who admire his environmental advocacy. The transformation of RFK Jr. from respected environmental lawyer to controversial public figure accelerates in the 2000s as he becomes increasingly vocal about vaccines. His 2005 article, Deadly Immunity in Rolling Stone and Salon, claims the CDC covered up evidence linking thimerosal in vaccines to autism, a theory debunked by dozens of peer-reviewed studies involving millions of children. His advocacy organization, Children's Health Defense, founded in 2016, promotes theories most medical experts consider dangerous misinformation. The 2020s bring RFK Jr. back into the political spotlight in ways that would have been unimaginable years earlier. His criticism of COVID-19 lockdown policies and vaccine mandates resonates with Americans who feel betrayed by public health authorities. His book, The Real Anthony Fauci, published in 2021, becomes a bestseller despite being dismissed by medical experts as conspiracy theory compilation. His presidential campaign, launched in April 2023, attracts support from across the political spectrum: environmentalists who admire his legal work, libertarians who appreciate his skepticism of government authority, conspiracy theorists who see him as a truth-teller. The spectacle of a Kennedy running for president as an outsider challenging the Democratic establishment reveals how completely American politics has transformed since the 1960s. The party that once embraced the Kennedy vision of activist government and scientific progress now views RFK Jr. as a dangerous heretic whose views make him unfit for consideration. When RFK Jr. polls at 20% in early Democratic primary surveys, party leaders don't celebrate the return of Kennedy magic. They panic about the threat he poses to their preferred candidates. But RFK Jr.'s political resurrection also demonstrates the enduring power of the Kennedy brand. Despite decades of scandals, tragedies, and controversies, the Kennedy name still carries weight with voters who remember when American politics seemed more hopeful, more idealistic, more capable of inspiring genuine change. RFK Jr. may not be the Kennedy his father's supporters would have chosen, but he is the Kennedy history has provided, and his very existence keeps alive the possibility that the family's story isn't finished. Ted Kennedy's death on August 25, 2009, marks the end of an era. The last Kennedy brother dies of brain cancer at his compound in Hyannis Port, surrounded by the same Cape Cod waters where Kennedy children learned to sail, swim, and dream of conquering the world. His funeral celebrates not just his individual achievements, and they were considerable, but the entire Kennedy experiment in American democracy. During 47 years in the Senate, Ted authored or co-authored 300 bills that became law, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Children's Health Insurance Program, and the No Child Left Behind Act. His legislative achievements touched virtually every aspect of American life. Yet he was also the Kennedy who left a young woman to die in a submerged car, whose drinking and womanizing became legendary, whose personal conduct repeatedly embarrassed his family and party. Ted Kennedy was a champion of the poor who lived a life of extraordinary privilege, a Kennedy who learned from his family's tragedies while never fully escaping their consequences. His death closes a chapter in American political history that began with his great-grandfather's arrival in Boston Harbor more than a century earlier. The Kennedy legacy in contemporary America is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Their names grace airports, schools, and government buildings from Boston to Los Angeles. John F. Kennedy International Airport handles 62 million passengers annually. The Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts hosts 2,000 performances each year. Robert F. Kennedy Stadium served as home to Washington's football team for 36 years. Yet their actual influence on current politics is minimal, their policy prescriptions seem dated, their approach to leadership appears naive in an era of polarization and cynicism. The Kennedy dynasty began with an Irish immigrant's refusal to accept limitations that poverty and prejudice imposed on his family. It reached its zenith with a president who inspired a generation to believe America could be better. It survived tragedies that would have destroyed lesser families and scandals that revealed the human costs of political ambition. And it continues today in forms that would surprise and perhaps disappoint its founders, but that nonetheless demonstrate the enduring power of the American dream to reinvent itself in each generation. The Kennedy story succeeded so completely in becoming a symbol of American possibility that it transcended its own humanity, becoming myth more powerful than the reality it represents. The gap between Kennedy myth and Kennedy reality has become so wide it's impossible to bridge, leaving us with a family simultaneously revered and reviled, celebrated and condemned, remembered and forgotten. They were both heroes and villains, both idealists and cynics, both servants of the public good and prisoners of their own ambition. They embodied the contradictions of American democracy itself, the tension between equality and hierarchy, between individual achievement and collective responsibility, between the promise of progress and the persistence of human frailty. The Kennedy name will outlive everyone who remembers the original Camelot. Whether their story is ultimately one of triumph or tragedy depends on what you believe America should be. Were they geniuses who proved that in America, talent and ambition can overcome any obstacle? Or were they cynical politicians who demonstrated that wealth and privilege can purchase any prize, including the presidency itself? Did they inspire genuine hope for a better country, or did they perfect the art of using idealistic rhetoric to disguise self-interested behavior? 176 years after Patrick Kennedy stepped off a coffin ship into Boston Harbor, his descendants are still chasing the dream he started. Some are environmental lawyers fighting corporate polluters. Some are politicians serving in Congress. Some are private citizens trying to escape the weight of a name that promises everything and guarantees nothing. They carry the burden of being Kennedys in a world that no longer believes in Camelot, but can't quite forget it existed. The dynasty survives, transformed and diminished, still reaching for power it may never reclaim. The dream endures, tarnished and questioned, still promising redemption it may never deliver. And America watches, fascinated and repelled, unable to look away from the family that once embodied its highest aspirations and now reflects its deepest doubts about whether greatness and goodness can ever truly coexist.